So, I think we're ready to go. Um, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar, Nearshoring, a North American Perspective. My name is Mark Entwistle. I'm a managing partner and director at Privus Capital, which is based in Toronto, Canada. As a very brief background, I was also formerly a Canadian ambassador, a career diplomat, press secretary to the Prime Minister, senior aide to the Foreign Minister, and various other things. I'm also delighted to be joined by Michael Camuñez and the team from Monarch Global Strategies. Few people know Mexico better than they do. The title of this webinar reflects, I think, the overall theme, obviously, of today's discussion, and it's a view that we need to look at the idea of nearshoring in perhaps a different way than is the norm. We believe it's more than just a word. It's in fact a very important development, and to really understand its potential, it should be seen in a broader North American continental context beyond the bilateral relationships with the United States alone. So we'll proceed in several stages this morning. Michael will talk a little bit about where nearshoring comes from, what's driving it. Gerardo de la Peña will look at the phenomenon in numbers. Ricardo Rodríguez will then discuss nearshoring from a Mexican perspective, and then I'll follow on from a Canadian perspective. I'll let my colleagues from Monarch introduce themselves, as they wish, as they move along. But in any case, you have a bio note on each of the panelists that came with the Zoom registration. One piece of housekeeping. I think it's best that we sort of leave the questions until the end. So we'll have what I hope will be a very useful and hopefully robust question and answer period at the end. But please don't hesitate to submit questions as we go along. We're all now very accustomed to webinars, so just use the chat function at the bottom and just put your questions into chat, and we will collate them and move on from there. So without further ado, Michael Camuñez.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you on the panel this morning, and great to see you, my friend. And good morning, everybody. Buenos dias, bonjour. Welcome to this, what I hope will be an important and insightful discussion on nearshoring. We appreciate your time and attention this morning, and I hope you'll take away some important insights that will help your business. I'll just say a quick word about myself and then get quickly into the substance. As many of you know, I'm the president, CEO, and co-founder of Monarch Global Strategies, a firm that I helped co-found about 7 years ago with Ambassador Jim Jones, our former U.S. ambassador to Mexico, and some of my colleagues on the call today. Our mission at Monarch is quite simple. Our logo is the Monarch butterfly, which typifies the integration of North America. That's a symbol of North America, and that's really our core thesis as a business. Our goal is to help companies that want to enter the North American market with a particular emphasis on Mexico, and we provide 360-degree services to help companies figure out where and how to enter Mexico, how to succeed there, and do business on the ground. Previously, I served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce at the International Trade Administration and the Obama administration. And while I had a global portfolio, I focused very heavily on the U.S.-Mexico bilateral relationship, including helping to launch the U.S.-Mexico high-level economic dialogue, which is now, I'm proud to say, one of the primary mechanisms by which the U.S. and Mexico manage their bilateral trade and commercial partnership. Previously, I was at the White House, a special counsel to the president. Before that, I was an equity partner at the global law firm of O'Melveny & Myers. I'm also an independent director of both publicly and privately traded companies, and I serve as a trustee at Stanford University and the Packard Foundation. Now, it seems that everywhere you look, everywhere we turn today, the topic of nearshoring predominates. And the issue, as you all know well, has arisen primarily because of the convergence of three related but distinct macroeconomic forces. First, of course, the COVID pandemic, which revealed the extreme vulnerability we face in North America from disruptions in our supply chains, not just, by the way, from abroad, but even within North America itself, as Luis Ricardo will mention later. COVID taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of having access to sensitive medicines, technologies, and products close to home. And while the COVID crisis may be behind us, the lessons from it have remained. In fact, just last week, the White House convened a new Council on Supply Chain Resilience, which is an outgrowth of President Biden's executive order on supply chains and the work of the Supply Chain Resilience Task Force. Second, rising political tensions between the U.S. and China, notwithstanding the thawing that we saw between the U.S. and China at the recent APEC summit, have intensified. China's aggressive actions against certain tech sectors domestically, its increasing threats against Taiwan, and a fear that the U.S. and China are entering into a Cold War-like period that could easily spill into a hot war, have caused many global companies to seek to diversify their China risk. At Monarch, we call this a China Plus strategy, because our sense is that most companies understand that they can't really afford to walk away from the Chinese market, given its size and how important it is, but they need rather to diversify their supply chain risk. And obviously, North America is a unique beneficiary of that, although obviously not alone. Regions like Southeast Asia and Indonesia, Vietnam, and other places are competing aggressively for that investment. Third, and at least partially, but not exclusively in response to these dynamics, the Biden administration has developed and aggressively pursued a new kind of U.S. industrial policy to ensure U.S. competitiveness, if not supremacy, in key sectors, from semiconductors to clean energy and electromobility and others, through historic legislation we've all been reading and hearing a lot about, from the Stimulus and Recovery Act itself to the CHIPS Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and others. So together with trillions of dollars of additional investment in renewable energy and once-in-a-generation investment in infrastructure, the U.S. is pursuing domestic regional spending at a pace that I don't think any of us have seen before, perhaps since the World War II, post-World War II era. This has created an enormous set of incentives for companies to relocate to the U.S. and, importantly, more broadly, to North America. Now, it'd be hard to overstate just how important these policies are in terms of providing a massive fiscal stimulus and commercial incentives for private investment, beyond just the rhetorical exhortation to bring manufacturing home, which we've seen in the past in prior administrations. These policies collectively provide massive incentives for both producers and consumers alike, but they clearly seek to confer advantages to the U.S. market, limiting benefits to investment in the United States, and with some limited exceptions to North America, including Canada and Mexico and other free trade partners. As just one small example, the U.S. now links the available $7,500 tax credits for the purchase of electric vehicles to the source and location of manufacturing. To qualify for half of these credits, at least 50% of the battery components have to be produced or assembled in North America. And for the other half, the Treasury Department has specified that at least 40% of the critical minerals used in the vehicle batteries have to be extracted or processed in the U.S. or in an FTA, free trade agreement, partner country. So these figures, importantly, rise to a stunning 90 and 80% respectively by 2027. So we can see the real intensified focus on North America in the battery and e-mobility sector, and I think that could well extend to other key sectors. So as global investors and manufacturers scramble to take advantage of these new opportunities, North America obviously stands uniquely well positioned to benefit. In fact, Mexico and Canada, as NAFTA or now USMCA partners, and perhaps the most important economic partners for the United States. Mexico has now eclipsed China as our largest bilateral trading partner, and Canada is not far behind. What's unique about the North American partnership, and I've been saying this for many years, is that we don't just trade together. It's not just about selling goods and services to one another. We make things together, and that makes all the difference. Our economies are deeply and vertically integrated, especially in key sectors like automotives, aerospace, electronic manufacturing, and others. And increasingly, we see not just trade in goods, but importantly, trade in investment and services as well. Leading companies like 3M, General Motors, Intel, and others have globally leading R&D facilities in Mexico that are leveraging the incredible human capital and engineering that Mexico can offer. As a quick aside, it's worth noting that it's not just American allies who are suddenly looking to Mexico and North America. In fact, one of the unintended consequences of U.S. trade policy to try to contain China is that China is now suddenly internationalizing, exporting both products like e-vehicles, where Mexico, for example, is the second largest export market for China for electric vehicles, and investment to Mexico and Latin America, in part, obviously, to gain duty-free access to the U.S. domestic market. So as Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, recently said in a comment to Bloomberg News with respect to Mexico, and I quote, "If you had to pick a country, this might be the number one opportunity." So that is what we want to focus on today, and how Mexico and Canada, two key pillars of the so-called Three Amigos, stand to benefit from this paradigm shift. We're first going to hear from my colleague, Gerardo de la Peña, who will provide some background data on what we're tracking and how this nearshoring trend might benefit Mexico and North America. And then we're going to turn for a deeper dive on the nearshoring dynamics, incentives, and opportunities, specifically in Canada and Mexico, with Luis, Ricardo, and Mark. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's a great seminar. Gerardo, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. First of all, I wanted to thank Mark and his team for the efforts to put this webinar together. The people that have been organizing these kind of events, they know that it takes a lot of time to put something like this together. So I wanted to thank Mark and the team for doing this. My name is Gerardo de la Peña, and I work for the last 20 years in the Mexican federal government. Basically, I was always part of the economic part of the teams, or the strategy part of the teams in different agencies in Mexico in the federal government. I've been working in Monarch for, I will say, almost a year in projects related to strategy and economic analysis. I'm located in Mexico City, and at this moment, we have a 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so we have a pretty nice weather over here. Basically, part of what I'm going to discuss with you today is some numbers and some insight that maybe I wanted to be like different and valuable to you, and also for the companies that you work with. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I'm going to start by saying that since the CHIPS Act was introduced, companies from around the world have responded very enthusiastically, announcing dozens of new semiconductor ecosystem projects, well over 200 billion in private investments. Sometimes we present a lot of numbers in part of this document, or what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes. Can you go back, please, Ricardo? Is to tell you is like what do those numbers represent. So when we talk about $200 billion, basically that's the sum of the annual GDP of five US states. Mexico has become the largest partner of the US for total trade in goods, with $537 billion in comparison to 518 from Canada and $370 billion from China. This is from the latest information available. During Thanksgiving week, and again, talking about this nearshoring phenomenon, the word nearshoring was mentioned 1,200 times in Mexico in the newspapers and the different platforms, social platforms. It was viewed, this word was read by 6.4 million Mexicans. And again, I'm just giving you these numbers so we can see the effects that this nearshoring will have in Mexico and also in the region. Since the nearshoring, let's say, started in, 2018, we have been following this stock price of a company that is called Vesta. This is an industrial park leader in Mexico, and the price of the stock basically tripled in the last 5 years. And again, these are just some numbers that will show us the magnitude of what is happening in Mexico regarding the nearshoring. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now you can buy the nearshoring. Basically, last week, an exchange-traded fund was launched in the New York Stock Exchange. And basically, not only Wall Street interest or Wall Street have interest in this phenomenon, but we in Mexico or in Canada or in any part of the world, we can buy this fund that basically will give us a profit regarding the nearshoring effect. Or basically, this index is comprised of 30 companies from Mexico, United States, and Canada. And again, if you're interested in this was launched last week, and the code for the fund is UNCH. And of course, you can see how these companies are doing. Basically, these companies are belong to the industrial, real estate, transportation, logistics, warehousing, and data center sectors in these 3 countries. And again, this is what is happening in the market regarding the nearshoring. Can we go to the next slide, please? Mexico, the evolution of Mexican manufacturing exports to the United States and FDI attraction. In the graph above, you can see that from 2018 to the present, manufacturing products imported by the US from China basically have a trended downward, while the same products imported from Mexico, they have a trended upward. You can see since the first quarter of 2018, how this phenomenon is changing the trajectory of the imports of the United States. And also, you can see the FDI, or the foreign direct investment attracted to Mexico in billions of dollars. You can see that the numbers basically have been increasing. And of course, we have COVID in 2020, 2021. But as you can see, we're expecting to finish this year with basically $35.4 billion in Mexico attracted from foreign direct investment. So can we go to the next slide, please? This is the nearshoring for Monarch is very relevant. And we have been doing a specific analysis to create what we call the Monarch Nearshoring Index. Basically, this index will capture if in Mexico we're getting all the benefits of this phenomenon, and we track this every quarter. So if you want to know more about this nearshoring index that we are presenting every quarter to the media in Mexico, please just send me an email. Regarding the last quarter information, this is the third quarter 2023. We estimate that this effect will generate around 400,000 new jobs. To have this in a perspective, last month, the state of California created 40,000 jobs. So basically, these are new jobs and extra additional jobs. So basically, when we say 400,000 new jobs, basically, that's the same amount of the California job creation almost in a year. We will have a potential increase of the Mexican GDP by 1.8%. And as I mentioned last slide, we will add $3.5 billion in foreign direct investment. And also we estimate that we will have an increase in real estate usage in Mexico by 1.5 million square meters. So how much is 1.5 million square meters? If we measure this as Costco's, think about this as 10 additional Costco's per month in Mexico. So that's the size of the effect. And again, these are additional Costco's of what we have been receiving in the last, I would say, 5 years. In Mexican federal government has made some efforts to promote nearshoring, such as the fiscal stimulus package to encourage manufacturing, the program for development of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and the Sonora Plan. However, we believe Mexico requires a comprehensive strategy with an agenda that allows to improve security, the rule of law, corruption, impunity, and the infrastructure that is necessary to capitalize on this historical opportunity. Again, thank you very much. Probably I took more time than I was expecting. Again, thank you very much for being here, for taking the time. Thank you very much to Mark and his team. So after my remarks, I'm gonna basically introduce Luis Ricardo Rodríguez. He's the managing partner of Monarch Global Strategy. Mr. Rodríguez guides multinational companies through complex business challenges in Mexico and Latin America, particularly as they relate to trade, customs, intellectual property, investments, financing, cross-border services, and taxation. He has strong relationships with several federal, state, and municipal governments and regulatory entities overseeing trade and investment activities in Mexico. With no more to say, I turn the floor over to Luis Ricardo.
Thank you, Gerardo. I also want to thank Mark and the Monarch Group for putting together this event, and thank you all for attending. It's great to speak to you and talk a little bit about what's going on in Mexico with, we think, it's a differentiated perspective of what's currently out there. We know that there are many events and seminars regarding nearshoring. We wanted to give this perspective of what's occurring from a North American perspective, not only what's occurring in Mexico, but rather have the approach of identifying what the opportunity is. Michael alluded to it earlier in the sense that what's currently occurring for the shift of investments or companies that are looking to expand their presence in North America is basically driven by the fact that they want to insulate themselves from any future pandemics or disruptions in supply chains that would expose their businesses to unnecessary delays or costs. So therefore, we've seen an important amount of companies that are currently reassessing and reevaluating their strategies in order to enhance their footprints in North America in order to be able to address the needs for their markets immediately. I am the managing partner for Monarch Global Strategies. Prior to joining Monarch, I was the partner in charge of the international trade and customs practice and the global location and expansion services practice for KPMG for Latin America. And what we did at the global location and expansion practice was basically what is now called nearshoring. We were the door for companies that were looking to do business and to establish themselves or to expand their business operations in Mexico and in Latin America. And part of our work there was, in addition to gather relevant information for decision makers, also negotiate incentives, determine what are the most appropriate structures for a company to do to establish or to incorporate themselves. In addition to obviously having the legal incorporation aspect of it, any necessary regulatory permits, authorizations, things that are needed in order for you to get up and running. That is what that practice focuses on, and we have more than a 25 years experience in doing work in that particular space. And speaking about the international trade and customs practice, we advise companies on their day-to-day customs operations of how to better address or to navigate the complexities of doing business in Mexico as it relates, obtaining the necessary permits, getting the goods in and out from Mexico, getting the necessary permits in order to get the goods in and out, as these may relate to COFEPRIS, to complying with non-tariff regulations or restrictions such as labeling requirements or food permits or anything related to the regulatory aspects. So we have a team of professionals within Monarch that have a subject matter expertise in order to talk about those particulars or to help companies in addressing these and navigating through these complexities. So I think, for starters, when talking about nearshoring from a Mexican perspective, I've put here, I think there are four important drivers or four important elements that I think highlight Mexico's importance or the reason why we're being so attractive in the international scenario as a nearshoring destination. First of all, obviously, location. Location is something for which obviously the Mexican government, or Mexico as a country, we're situated just south of the United States. We share a continental border of 3,145 kilometers, which translates into 1,954 miles with 47 ports of entry. It is a very dynamic border, with which we communicate with our neighbors to the north. And therefore, I think the location, the fact that we have access to the U.S. market and obviously access also to the seas, the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific, I think gives us an important leverage when it comes to trade operations and certainly exporting. As my colleagues have also identified earlier, in early 2023. U.S. imports of goods from Mexico surpassed those from China, making Mexico the main origin for goods that are currently imported into the U.S. for the first time in our modern trade history. And it currently has, Mexico has 13 free trade agreements with more than 50 countries in the world, which grants preferential access to the main economies around the world, the globe. And I think this is an important element that is worth mentioning. Now, when we talk about our competitiveness and the cost of doing business in Mexico, I think one important factor that's usually called out is our workforce. We have a very young and skilled talent pool, averaging 29 years of age, which is also very cost effective, which currently places it as one of the 10 most attractive workforces in the globe by the Total Workforce Index. This, basically is an analysis of our population that is currently active from an economic standpoint, the availability of that labor, and obviously the skills that are attained by our workforce are all of the factors that are evaluated for the purpose of putting together this particular index. And last but not least, I think from an industry standpoint, manufacturing is in Mexico's DNA. We have been operating since the 1960s, an alternative to the Bracero program, which basically was a program that allowed legal migration into the U.S. for part-time, field workers from Mexico. And some of them that were not able to get into the program or go to the U.S. were basically employed along the border in what's currently known as the Maquiladora program or the Twin Plant program, which basically is a program that allows companies primarily along the border to establish manufacturing operations where goods, raw materials, parts, and components are imported on a temporary basis in order to be elaborated, transformed, or repaired, and then subsequently exported as a finished product to another country. And obviously the majority of it is, since it's located in our northern border, is destined for the United States. So more than 85% of Mexico's current total exports are attributed to the manufacturing industry, and that is obviously an important amount of it. And particularly the automotive, aerospace, technology, which is electronic, and the electrics and the medical sectors, account for an important amount of what's currently produced along the border in this particular program. And since the year 2000, we've also been a very popular destination when it comes to the location of services that are exported. So, for example, what we did see is that around the year 2000, there was an important increase in Mexico in the incorporation of call centers, back office operation, processing centers, centers of excellence that basically, as it occurs with manufacturing, we are taking advantage of our skilled labor that also has bilingual capabilities in order to produce services that are subsequently exported. And we also have a trade program in Mexico in place that allows us to afford tax and duty benefits to companies that are located in that particular space. So in speaking in particular about some of the industries where we do business, we have a comparison of the industries in the U.S., Mexico, and also, by no means I'm also going to project a map of the Canada industry that mirrors some of these activities and investments. When talking about the automotive sector in particular, Mexico is the world's 7th largest passenger vehicle manufacturer and 5th largest manufacturer of heavy-duty vehicles for cargo. We're also the leading global exporter of tractor trucks, where 95.1% are destined to the United States. We're also the 4th largest exporter of heavy-duty vehicles for cargo and the 2nd largest export market after Canada for U.S. medium and heavy-duty trucks. If we see, the slides, we can see that, the automotive industry is spread around in Mexico. If we look at our slide on the right, which is basically a slide that was put together by the Secretary of Economy, we can see that most northern states have some type of presence of the automotive industry when it's mainly destined for export. And then we have this large corridor, which is known as the Bajío region, which also is home to an important amount of companies that have invested there and that are engaged in the automotive sector, particularly for those that are need to export to other jurisdictions different from the United States. So in the case of the United States, we can also see that the industry is focused in certain states. And this, I think, it gives us elements to, I think, an important conclusion. And I think it goes and ties in very well to the struggle in order to be able to be attractive for the automotive sector in particular. We have seen recent efforts from states that want to attract an OEM. But obviously, in order for you to place an investment of this type that requires tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, a very sophisticated and development supply chain, you need to have a certain amount of development and work put into it, and obviously infrastructure in order to be a viable solution. And it's not something that can necessarily be determined by decree, even if you offer incentives or if you want to drive a particular operation to that particular state. As we did see, it was the intent when Tesla announced first their investment in Nuevo León. Talks about some other states wanting to draw that investment into other states in the south, southeast, or in Hidalgo in particular. I think it's important to note that obviously the presence of tier 1, tier 2 suppliers is an important element of the decision, in addition to obviously the infrastructure that's currently there, among other factors that are important for production purpose, such as electricity and access to other natural resources. In the case of electronics and the electronic and electric industry, we also see that there's an important history in Mexico for companies that are engaged in that particular industry. As the landscape continues to evolve, there's a significant shift underway. I think, in Mexico, in fairness, we certainly have lost ground when it comes to our manufacturing capabilities in the electronic sector in particular. This is due to various reasons. I think, we've granted preferences for the importation of electronic inputs that have made it easier for us to be able to access these from abroad, from China and other Asian countries that have, I think, a greater expertise than Mexico in that particular sector. And we have done away with some, electronic component manufacturing operations that we did have maybe 20 years ago. This is also part of, Mexico in 2003 joined the Information Technology Agreement, and we have a couple of decrees that allow us to grant preferential access to electronic components, which, for those companies that are engaged in the manufacture of goods, it's very convenient for them to import them directly from other countries, or considering the presence of large trading companies in Mexico, to buy them locally for companies that import them from abroad. Nevertheless, I think it's important to mention that obviously importing these items from abroad goes against the necessities for nearshoring, in the sense that the resilience of supply chains, or in the event of another disruption, many of the companies that are looking to establish operations in Mexico want to segregate themselves from the dependency of importing these inputs from abroad, and therefore, we do believe that there will be an increased amount of manufacturing in this particular space, in order to at least take it to the level where we were 20 years ago. And again, by comparison, we're also presenting, the slides in the U.S. in that particular sector. One other strategic sector is the aerospace. The aerospace has been an important industry in Mexico, particularly in a couple of northern states such as Baja, Chihuahua, and in the case of Querétaro, where there's a dedicated university that deals with training for individuals that are in that particular space. It has been deemed a large growth industry in the past years. Nevertheless, as it occurs with many other industries, but obviously the pandemic affected the aerospace industry and the generation of and the manufacture of aircraft, and therefore those companies were heavily affected in Mexico. And then again, as we've seen with the other slides, if we see the phenomenon in the U.S., that industry is also very scattered. And the last strategic sector that we want to talk about is the healthcare, or the health industry in general. We are the leading exporter of medical equipment and devices into the United States, and the 8th largest global manufacturer of medical devices. And Mexico is home to over 2,500 companies specializing in medical device manufacturing. And we would single out Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, and Baja as the states that have been more attractive to these international firms that have some type of manufacturing operation, while singling out Tijuana as the largest number of medical device manufacturing companies in North America. And for all of you interested, obviously we have the hyperlinks to the sites that to which we would credit this information. And last but not least, I think there are many of these industries are obviously mirrored with what we've seen with Canada, and I think what's important to mention here is that Mexico and Canada have a long-standing relationship when it comes to exchange programs for agricultural workers. Mexico is a top source country for Canada, and is often cited as a model for international labor mobility arrangements. In 2022, a record of close to 40,000 workers were welcomed in Canada under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And I think this acknowledges the role of Mexican nationals to play a source of labor to Canada, specifically sustaining the domestic agricultural sector in 2022. So I think the point here is, since many of these industries that we're looking at, such as the electronic, electrical, the automotive, the health and medical devices, and the aerospace industry also have an important presence in Canada, I think there's elements for us to say that we could certainly replicate and collaborate both with Canada and in the U.S. in order to supplement with our young and talented workforce the activities that are required in order to be efficient in producing these goods in North America, throughout North America, and obviously playing to our country's strengths depending on the activity that's done. So to give an example of the CHIPS Act, we know, for example, that the U.S. is offering important economic incentives, as Michael mentioned, to the manufacture of chips, and many of them are starting manufacturing operations in the U.S. But then again, I think, there's certainly an opportunity in Mexico to be a player in that particular supply chain for some of the back-end operations or the R&D aspects of the design of the chips, where these operations could certainly take place in areas where Mexico can be very competitive and efficient from a cost standpoint, and that certainly could replicate through many other industries as we've identified. It's worth mentioning that also, in addition to USMCA, Mexico and Canada were both parties to the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership with preferential access to Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, Vietnam, Peru, Malaysia, Chile, Brunei, and as of 2024, the United Kingdom, which we know since Brexit, Mexico has a continuated trade program with the UK, but ultimately with their accession to the CPTPP, we would certainly could qualify for preferential trade in goods under that particular trade agreement, which, as we know, the efforts for Canada and Mexico to join were driven by the US, but ultimately with the US pulling out of the agreement, we stayed along the process until we concluded the negotiation, and obviously it's now part of our extensive trade agreement network. So that's where we see a lot of the opportunities in the different industries where Mexico is competitive, in addition to many others where I think, we believe that we could certainly be very competitive. But now let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've identified for nearshoring, and that we're seeing, we saw them from the beginning, and obviously with the increase of these announcements into Mexico, I think it's important to take in consideration. First of all, I think, in my lifetime, at least, we've lived through 3 or 4 Mexican moments where we believe that the pieces are together for Mexico to thrive from an economic standpoint. And unfortunately, many of them, have been, I think, have not realized, our potential. And I would obviously call out the negotiation of NAFTA, which, we entered into force in 1994. And obviously there was a lot of expectation, and certainly it's been a hugely successful trade agreement. But immediately after that, we had some political unrest in Mexico, and obviously in '95 we had a very important economic crisis, which basically prevented us from realizing, really the economic benefits of NAFTA to Mexico in particular. And we certainly had a political change in 2000 that also had many investors antsy about the economic well-being of Mexico. And the latest one was probably in the last administration of Peña Nieto, where some of the structural reforms, particularly in the energy sector, were in place, and that there was talks about a Mexican moment and how things were going to be economically very good for Mexico. But I think, in fairness, this particular nearshoring opportunity is the most important one that we've seen. At least I would probably put NAFTA in first place, but then I think the trend of nearshoring could certainly be an important economic moment, and it's important that we take advantage of it. So I think it's important to state that this is an opportunity that can certainly go away due to the absence of a clear industrial policy to promote investment. I think as we know, this administration, the federal administration in turn, eliminated the promotion bodies, which is not necessarily a tragedy. I think what's happened is that the states in particular had to step up and obviously play to their own strengths and do their own homework in trying to be attractive to foreign firms in order to draw investment. But that also has led to some amount of competition between the states, which I think has muddled the waters into get a better sense of where it makes more sense for them to establish a particular investment. And there's certainly, government actions that deter nearshoring. As there's lots of talks about, obviously, this government's promotion of fossil fuels, investing, obviously, in a refinery, and just initiatives that drive away from what is currently an international tendency of incorporating clean energies to their production processes, and obligations in order to eliminate their carbon footprint, not only for manufacturing firms, but that also obligation goes to even some of the suppliers, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So I think that's an important element that where we don't see that there's only not an alignment between what's currently out there from a policy standpoint and what these companies demand. And that also takes us to the fact that in the case of electricity, there are certain areas where there are challenges in order for us to be able to get enough electricity where these processes are electricity demanding, investments. So that leads us, I think, before to a preliminary conclusion that the analysis that's done that's particular to the industry and particular to the company of where to establish or to expand a particular investment is very, very important. There's many elements that we need to consider in order to determine if it's feasible to establish or to expand a particular operation in Mexico. And there's many factors that we need to consider for that purpose, such as availability of workforce, obviously the factors in order to produce, such as electricity, water, to the extent that these are extensive, the availability of industrial park, just to name a few of them. I think there's also one important element is that this government has given wrong signals to foreign investments, to investors regarding certainty and the protection of law. I think the latest issue that we could certainly call out is last week's announcement that the rails would need to, will need to accommodate the use of their concessions for the traffic of passengers. I mean, it's not that the measure by itself is bad, but I think, for the holders of those concessions in Mexico, the fact that they will need to adjust their operating parameters in order to accommodate passenger traffic in those same rail lines, I think it's going to put them in predicament, and certainly I think it's something to look out for. And there have been many initiatives by the current government that I think fall into this particular issue. We could cite obviously the cancellation of the airport, driving all cargo operations to the new airport, which has been very challenging. The creation of measures that I think that go against foreign investments, such as this controlling beneficiary initiative, where in order for you to incorporate the legal entity, you need to present all of the information related to the shareholders, going back to the actual individuals that hold an interest in a particular legal entity. The incorporation of the Electronic Bill of Lading Act, among other measures that I think are burdens and additional obstacles to trade, and that there are certainly, I think, elements to consider when establishing a particular investment in Mexico. I did mention, some of the states competing for FDI. I think, we've seen also some collaboration to the extent that these are governed by the same party. In the case of Nuevo León and in Jalisco, which are both governed by Movimiento Ciudadano, they recently struck an agreement where they are going to promote the trade of goods between these two states and allow actually for companies in Jalisco to be able to use the Colombia Customs Port as a dedicated port for the exit of goods that are coming from the south through that particular agreement. So even though some states are certainly collaborating, we certainly could see a case where, as it occurred, with the case of Tesla and other, major investments in Mexico, some of the states may be competing in order to entice these companies to come into a particular place, and that could certainly, lead to a decision-making process which is not necessarily in the best interest of business. One other important element to consider is that we have elections in 2024, as we know. We have elections actually both in Mexico and in the United States, which are certainly, going to be something to be looking out for as to who is going to be our next president and how accommodating it's going to be for foreign investment. We certainly do believe that, regardless of the results, I think, the nearshoring trend is going to continue, and the incoming president, I think, needs to will probably, establish conditions for this to continue to benefit Mexico, regardless of the party of which the next president comes from. We also need to consider also that We have the USMCA review in 2026, so that is also a very important element to consider. We still don't know who, obviously, the Mexican and the U.S. president will be. We don't know what's going to be the role of China in North America by 2026. As you know, there is an escape clause in the USMCA that allows that actually obligates for the parties to notify its partners of any negotiations with China in particular for any trade agreement, and that could certainly be a grounds for withdrawing from the USMCA, which obviously would be disastrous for North America. But and obviously we don't think that we're currently there, but politics will certainly play an important factor by 2026 when that decision would be evaluated and ultimately taken. And the last issue that I will probably call out is that the fact that many of the drivers for this administration have been focused on promoting investment in the southeast of Mexico, in particular this project, which in fairness has been in the works for the past 20 or so years, which means that it's not particular to Morena. What is particular to Morena is the fact that they're establishing 10 industrial sites along this rail line of the interocean corridor that basically is going to allow containers to come in from Asia into Salisna Cruz, offloaded into a railway that is going to take them to Coatzacoalcos and ship them out through the Gulf of Mexico to the eastern seaboard of the U.S. and obviously Canada and even to Europe. And this is certainly an intriguing alternative to the Panama Canal and other obviously trade ports that we currently have in Mexico. So just to give you a sense of what this opportunity is, these are some of the routes. We're already seeing that, for example, Houston, New Orleans, Mobile, and Tampa, they're enhancing their capabilities in order to accommodate cargo that will come through those ports as a result of the use of the interocean corridor. So I think this is certainly a reality. And it's something that it's going to have a very important impact on trade between Mexico and certainly North America. And just for your reference, these are some of the firms that are currently out there. Not many are in the labor-intensive manufacturing activities. There's a lot of petrochemicals and chemicals and plastics, which also leads you to question, the conditions from an environmental standpoint for some of the operations that would occur here. But that is what currently they have in that particular area. So since in the benefit of time, I'm just going to go through very briefly what's currently out there from an incentive standpoint. As a result of the CHIPS Act, many countries in Asia have been establishing their own legislation trying to promote manufacturing and R&D operations for the manufacture of chips. And just to give you a sense, China has a package that's going to run through 14 years for $150 billion over 10 years, and this is something that they've already agreed to and announced. And just to put it in perspective, in the case of the CHIPS Act, in the U.S., the package is a third of that. It's $52.7 billion over 5 years, over which 11.2 billion is destined to R&D, while the fabs are probably going to get around 39 billion for investment incentives in that particular region. In the case of Mexico, there was a presidential decree published only a couple of weeks ago, where we're granting tax incentives to companies that are doing business in the automotive, electric, pharma, agro industry, food, electrical, healthcare, and cinema activities. And it's an incentive that is going to be applicable for only 2 years. There's no really economic target established for these incentives. It's basically an immediate deduction of investments that are made, of new investments made during 2023 and 2024. And the other incentive that's currently granted is a 25% credit of any incremental training expenses incurred by firms that are going to be doing business in Mexico in these industries as a direct deduction. And the deadline to apply these incentives are 2025. So I think in objectively, it's hardly the answer or a response to what other countries are doing from an incentive standpoint from the federal government. But obviously, we will need to wait until we see what the incoming administration is going to do. So I would just basically finish by addressing some of the issues that we believe are important to put importance on going forward. I think we need to determine what are each of the states in which investment is increasing in Mexico, and play to their strengths, being it information technology products, automotive, medical devices, electrical, food, or others. It's important for us, obviously, to establish and have very clear information about the labor availability by sector, by each of the states. I think trying to get the information or a source of information that is reliable and that allows us to make or reach a decision to where an investment is going to be located and or expanded. I think it's important for us to have that information and that there's no reliable source in order to get that information. Obviously, clean energy projects, we talked about those. I think it's important for the Mexican government to authorize these dual combination or solar projects that are currently halted by the Mexican government through different agencies in order to accommodate industrial and manufacturing operations. I think we also need to revise what we're currently doing when it comes to industrial developments and addressing logistical challenges. I think, for example, for the time being, we're going to need direct cargo flights from Asia, for which currently I believe Guadalajara Airport is the only one that's currently taking a direct cargo flight from Asia. And I think, that in order to fully address the needs for nearshoring, at least for startup, I think that needs to be changed. And there's a couple of other destinations that need to have a direct cargo flight, and certainly the use of train to move cargo around Mexico, and that brings us obviously to the security issue that we have throughout Mexico, and that also needs to be addressed. And just last but not least, the Mexican government announced the Ventanilla Única benefit, which basically is a one-stop shop for permits and authorizations that are needed for companies that are doing business in Mexico. I think we need those not only for the southeast, which is for the areas in which they were created, but rather for those that are highly recipient of investment. I think there needs to be a one-time shop, since it's. I think we need to be very accommodating to the companies that are coming here and the need to get all the authorizations instead of going to Mexico City in order to obtain them. I think we need to review the tax and regulatory framework for companies that are investing in and relocating suppliers, not looking just at their own operations, but rather their ecosystems that are coming into Mexico, and to give them, I think, a tax structure that benefits and that creates, or extends the benefits to also their suppliers in addition to the OEMs. We also, I think, it'd be important to, rather than imposing or increasing tariffs, as we saw in a decree that was just published a couple of weeks ago, particularly in the metal industry, I think it's important for us to review what's currently happening with this nearshoring trend and the needs for companies when it comes to inputs, and obviously make a revision when it's due to the tariffs that are currently in place for the importation of those goods into Mexico. I would leave it at that in the benefit of time, and obviously I'll remain open to any questions or comments that you may have at the end of the session. I will hand it now over to Mark for his remarks on nearshoring into Canada. Thank you very much.
Well, Luis, thank you very much. Excellent. So we've had the benefit of looking at nearshoring now from a Mexican perspective, and for that I of course thank Luis and Gerardo. So I'd now like to take a little bit of time and go north and discuss the same nearshoring idea from a Canadian perspective. So from the geographically top end of the continental North American trading system. And the comments that I'll make, and I'll move along at a fair clip in the interest of time, I think have really three main audiences. Firstly, Canadian business itself. Secondly, our friends in Mexican business, and finally, companies in other parts of the world. In the case of fellow Canadians, I believe that nearshoring here is now one of those kind of commonplace trade ideas, though, that tends to get a bit washed out in the uncertainty of what it really means in practice for a lot of business. But I think that that our Canadian business colleagues do need to pay attention to the issue because it offers greater protection of existing opportunity in the United States, as well as new possibilities with Mexico. And for Mexican companies, there is a world of potential synergies with their Canadian counterparts that make more sense than they ever did in the past in the context of nearshoring. And for companies in other countries, especially our neighbors in the Americas, Canada provides a platform for enhanced access to the United States market in the context of nearshoring. So let me just take a little bit of time and flesh this out a little bit. But before diving into some quite specific examples of areas where we see concrete opportunity, if you allow me, just let me go up to about 30,000 feet just for a moment, because it's related to the nearshoring piece. Although the term nearshoring is very often used interchangeably with friendshoring, which was coined as a term by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen back in the spring of 2022. The nearshoring piece, I think, for us has a slightly different connotation. I mean, a nation can trade with other countries that are certainly not near geographically, and yet they're still considered allied friends. But we know that even friends are not necessarily always reliable trading partners, because after all, they have their own national economic interests. And at the same time, those that are near can be friends, to use this kind of terminology. So in a way, nearshoring is the premium offer. Priority economic and trade relations with those that are both near and friends. So that's a much smaller club. And in the context of the United States, it's most obviously Canada and Mexico. The kind of Trump style idea of reshoring is, I think, a different idea again, and it implies, kind of thinly veiled or not so thinly veiled protectionism. Michael's already laid out very well and up at the beginning where nearshoring comes from. And it is indeed more than just supply chain resilience, although that's a major part of it. And it's also related to to geopolitics and strategic concerns over reliance on China, in particular, perceived as an unfriendly actor. And again, I think, as Michael made clear, as a policy goal, nearshoring is, very largely driven by the current United States government. So I think that Canadian business should be under no illusions about the seriousness of the Biden administration, which, as we've watched it and seen, and as Michael outlined, has acted in deeds and not just words. So nearshoring reframes the North American business opportunity in two ways, at least two ways. Firstly, it serves as a parallel strategic pathway to help sustain preferential trade access to the critically important U.S. market. So as a hedge, so to speak. And then while there may be some Canadians who doubt the importance of the U.S. market to Canada, it is the core pillar of our country's prosperity and remains so. There's a bigger context to this idea here. And as Luis mentioned in passing at the end of his presentation, there's a mandatory six-year review of the North American Free Trade and Investment Agreement between, of course, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, which had replaced NAFTA, as everybody knows. That review must take place before July the 1st, 2026. Now, of course, we also all know that the agreement has different names. In Canada, it's called CUSMA, but I'll use that for kind of uniformity amongst jurisdictions, as others have. I'll use the American version, which is the USMCA. Regardless of the preparatory work by respective government trade negotiators, which will really begin in earnest over the next year, the fact is that the review will take place at the level of cabinet ministers, and it will take place at the Trilateral Free Trade Commission. This will make it, by definition, intensely political. All three USMCA countries will be having national elections in the lead up to the review, as Luis mentioned, which can be expected to be marked by increasingly protectionist rhetoric, probably especially in the United States, and unpredictable election outcomes with new governments, new actors, and different politics. This makes the USMCA particularly vulnerable to political opposition to the agreement and its longer-term extension. In a worst-case scenario, this could end up being a trade train wreck disaster, or it could create a level of uncertainty that is the curse of all business leaders if the new governments fail to extend the agreement by a further 16 years and revert to annual such reviews. So in this environment, the appeal of nearshoring acts as a strategic hedge against the vulnerability of the USMCA. Additionally, trade negotiators, Canadian, and I would argue Mexican for that matter, need the support of the business communities, firing on all cylinders. And we learned this from NAFTA, all those companies in our countries who depend on market access to the United States to look for all ways to prove the benefit of the privileged and integrated continental trade system. So the branding and enhancing of commercial activity under the nearshoring banner can help reinforce among American politicians the importance of having Canadian and Mexican companies close as near and reliable friends. These are beneficial relationships that are best advanced in the framework of an extended USMCA. So nearshoring, conceptually, in addition to its commercial advantages, is really about additional protection of preferential access to the US market. The second way that nearshoring reframes North American business opportunity from a Canadian perspective is that we think it offers a revisioning of the Canada-Mexico commercial relationship beyond the bilateral trade between the two countries, as important as that is. According, of course, to Bloomberg, and both Gerardo and Luis, mentioned it, Mexico has now surpassed both Canada and China, respectively, as the largest trading partner of the United States. This is a fact that I don't think has properly settled in the minds of the Canadian business community. Mexico is the United States' principal trading partner. So given shared strategic and commercial interests in hedging against the vulnerability of USMCA, one can now imagine new collaborations, strategic partnerships, joint ventures between Canadian and Mexican companies to work increasingly together on securing privileged access to the US market, each with its own specific advantages and capabilities, networks, and market access. It would be ideal from a Canadian perspective to see more great Mexican companies establish a brick and mortar presence in Canada. And of course, in some sectors, Canadians and Mexicans are competitors. But the nearshoring opportunity or imperative creates a moment now to think bigger, to expand horizons, and to look at opportunity differently. In many cases, working together may be more profitable and secure than going it alone. For Canadians, Mexico as a platform provides a unique window on the more distant southern US market, and similarly for Mexicans, Canada provides the same for the northern American states, where we are particularly strong in terms of market penetration and of course, which are a little further away. So it's both near and friend, such joint business opportunity further buttresses the argument in the United States for the indispensability of integrated North American trade and commerce. And for companies in countries outside Canada and Mexico, nearshoring means that both of these offer a platform from which to take best advantage of what the nearshoring premium has to offer. Again, strategic partnerships, joint ventures, new kinds of collaborations that indirectly make the North American trade project work for them in ways that are complementary to and greater than their strictly bilateral trade. So let's go down to ground level again. We see several areas of business where such collaboration on nearshoring could be especially promising. This is, of course, not an exhaustive list, and there would be other possibilities. It's no accident that these areas of the economy were also some of them identified by both the governments of Canada and the United States directly in the context of the Canada-US Working Group on Supply Chains, which was established by President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau in November of 2021. It's also no accident that, to a large extent, they echo in some cases exactly the sectors that Luis was discussing, but from a slightly different perspective. This is, of course, because they reflect areas of particular Canadian expertise and advantage, but they also reflect the integration that's been underway in the North American continental economy for now decades since NAFTA. The first place to start is with the electric vehicle battery supply chain. This is a global priority sector, but it's especially relevant to North America, and it's a big priority in Canada. This is where the political appeal of the nearshoring and the branding around nearshoring is most pronounced, driven, of course, at least partly by the dominant place of China in global EV battery manufacture. Here, we're talking about an integrated system. We're talking about mining, battery and fuel cell manufacture, and the research and development that's driving the EV field. Greater collaboration between Canadian and Mexican companies throughout the EV battery supply chain, creating economies of scale and new synergies, faster breakthroughs in the R&D that's so necessary in such a fast-moving, innovative field will, I think, reward those participants with a much more prominent place in the nearshoring world that's becoming important, so important in the United States. Closely allied to this area are the critical minerals, again, driven largely by global geopolitics. Canadian mining companies have been in Mexico for years, but of course, some of the key critical and strategic minerals so important to our economies, especially to that of the United States as an engine of this continental integrated economy, lie those minerals. There's 31 of them identified in Canada. They lie in Canadian rock. So getting it out is capital intensive. So there remains much opportunity for Mexican and other mining capital to participate in the Canadian mining sector for critical minerals. As an example, while much attention has been understandably paid to lithium for all understandable reasons, I have in mind another, also as an example, often overlooked ingredient, igneous hard phosphate. This is not the soft phosphate used in fertilizer and agriculture, but rather the kind of phosphate that is used in LFP battery technology for electric vehicles. As I understand it, much of the world's supply came from Russia, which of course has now been disruptive for the reasons that we know, situation in Ukraine and accompanying sanctions. And Canada is one of the relatively few places in the world where such hard phosphate is found. Another area resonates with something that both Gerardo and Luis spoke about earlier, semiconductors. So critical to resilience and self-reliance of the American electronics and defense industries. I would only add briefly here again that both President Biden and the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau focused the political attention on both governments when they announced together in March of this year the establishment of a Canada-US semiconductor manufacturing corridor. So the Canadian semiconductor industry is known for its high-quality, well-trained workforce, obviously, and for high value add technologies in that value chain, such as exotic compound semiconductors. So there may be excellent synergies with Mexican R&D in the semiconductor industry and ways to join in enhancing that Canada-US manufacturing corridor. At the center of so much of the nearshoring discussion is the question of trans-border logistics. So much so that this has been identified as a priority by the Canada-United States Working Group on Supply Chains. Both the Canadian and Mexican logistics industries have strong experience in navigating the respective borders, but there may be areas where companies could be cooperating more directly. Here we are thinking about collaboration in developing next generation technology and sharing of know-how in digital information and best practice supply chain management systems to continue to further harmonize and streamline entry into the United States. That would benefit both countries and the companies of both countries in a broader North American system. Logistics companies from one country, for example, could explore participating in the growth of peer companies in the other through strategic investment or share swapping, for example. This would allow Mexican logistics firms to gain access to the business prospects of the northern border and vice versa. More than 90% of Canadian manufacturers are medium and smaller businesses that in turn supply larger companies. And they could benefit from partnerships with Mexican counterparts to help substitute for reliance on organic growth only. Further areas related to the life sciences and biotechnology. I include here critical medicines and therapeutics and medical devices, like Luis mentioned, and diagnostics, and more broadly, med tech. This is, of course, an industry composed of two different categories of companies, really. So, the so-called big pharma, those global giant pharmaceutical companies on the one hand, and on the other, the more nimble, agile, and by definition, smaller research-driven innovators. So the global companies are present everywhere. I mean, they're global. They're huge in Mexico. They're huge in Canada. They're there in a major way, and they march to their own drum. So I think that the nearshoring advantage is more relevant in a way for the ecosystem of these smaller, innovative development companies. There are dynamic life sciences hubs across Canada. In Toronto, especially around the so-called Discovery District, where research hospitals are clustered together, as well as, of course, the University of Toronto. There, world-class work's being done in genomics and in proteomics and STELSEM research and photonics and drug research and development and neurosciences and other diagnostics and therapies. And there are similar stories in Montreal and in Vancouver and in Ottawa. So much of this work is based around the universities and research institutes, which of course abound in Mexico as well. So Canadian and life sciences innovators at this kind of smaller developmental stage companies could collaborate even further to great effect to additionally help feed and protect the pharmaceutical and critical medicine needs of all our countries, but of the United States. Despite all this activity in life sciences in Canada, Canada receives only about 1% of the world's pharmaceutical research and development investment, which creates a great opportunity for Mexican and other capital to harness value. There are other areas worth exploring, of course, like agricultural technology, ag tech. Both Canada and Mexico are important agricultural producers in their own right. But the more each could produce by seeking and improving innovative ag tech solutions together, the more that reinforces the benefits of the North American reshoring for all. At a kind of macro level again, and to conclude my remarks, Canada generally does not have advantages that derive from lower labor costs for manufacturing, but it does offer a distinct and complementary profile in the North American economy. The Canadian labor market, of course, offers highly skilled workers that fuel research and development and the knowledge economy. And this feature is bolstered by one of the most aggressive immigration policies in the world, which allows Canada to attract top talent globally. And in this context, Mexican and other companies that are focused on, particularly on research and development and innovation, creativity in any sector, of which there are many, as Luis has mentioned, could benefit from securing access and collaborating with such a human resource asset as they would find in Canada to bolster their own growth. Now, of course, I could go on, but I will stop there. So, in short, we hope that by looking at the idea of nearshoring more closely from both a Mexican and a Canadian perspective, we may have planted a seed that could grow into greater opportunities. And I think nearshoring becomes most powerful as an idea when it's seen in its bigger North American context. So each of us, of course, on the panel are more than happy to take questions. So I will stop there, and I'll sort of moderate any questions. And then, Michael, Luis, Gerardo, please jump in, whenever you may wish. So let me just look at all this here.
Mark, thanks for your
Yes.
presentation, which I found really interesting. I really appreciate the fact that you've laid out some very, very specific industries and sectors where there's opportunity for collaboration between Canadian, American, and Mexican firms. Historically, you've mentioned that the relationship in North America, if we're honest, has been sort of it's three amigos, but it's really been a very bifurcated relationship: the U.S.-Canada relationship and the U.S.-Mexico relationship. And the Canada-Mexico relationship has not been as strong as it could or should be. Obviously, the two countries don't share a border, but they share a continent and a hugely important market in the middle. Are you seeing from your side, and Luis, you might have thoughts on this from what you're seeing in Monterrey, are you seeing an uptick in Canadian presence, engagement with Mexico? Is this happening, or is this still kind of theoretical at this stage?
Oh, is that for Luis? Yeah, Luis?
Or for you, Mark, from a Canadian perspective, are you seeing and hearing about Canadians getting more engaged in Mexico?
Sorry, I thought that was going to Luis. And of course, after a comment or two, Luis as well. Yeah, Michael, thanks very much for that. I think in general there is. I think clearly around, especially in the mining industry, particularly active, especially some of the manufacturing, the electronics, auto parts, for example, in the continental auto trade, very much so. The financial sector, but to some degree, banking. I think there's a feeling, certainly though, among trade policy folks in Canada that we would like, and I'm speaking here as a Canadian, see that relationship much more diverse than it is now, and a more two-way street in some ways, and more diversified. So to see Canadian companies entering these sort of what I would now call non-traditional sectors in Mexico, especially around this kind of knowledge economy stuff, technology, the life sciences, AI, all that kind of stuff that we hear so much about, and we know that where Mexico has strong capacity. So I think it's a relationship that's still, because it's focused so much on the bilateral nature of it, really, it hasn't reached its potential. And of course, as I mentioned in just in passing, I think there's a great and I don't think desire is too strong a word. There is a desire to see more Mexican engagement in the Canadian economy. I mean, there's some, there's a couple of good, solid Mexican companies, but by and large, I would suspect that if you were to look at a list and the number of Canadian companies in Mexico vis-a-vis the number of Mexicans in Canada, it would be one would be a relatively long column and the other one would be a very short column. So I think there's a great appetite for greater Mexican engagement in Canada. Luis? Oh, you're on mute, Luis.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for the question, Michael. If we look at the data that's been announced or put out there by the Secretary of Economy in the first quarter of 2023, there were 200 companies from Canada that were interested in investing in Mexico, and this is basically from a report that was issued by Scotiabank. There are right now. The numbers that we have is that foreign investment during that first quarter was $831 million, of which 33 already were for existing companies just increasing their investment, and 5.6% were new investments of those 831 million, which isn't that big of a figure. And most of the companies of Canadian origin that are coming, at least in that particular period, we're going to Mexico City, Zacatecas, and the state of Mexico, which are not traditionally, manufacturing centers. So I do believe that, I think it's a differentiated approach that I think, is applicable. And this was also something that we talked about last week when we were talking about nearshoring with the UK's accession to CPTPP. Because obviously, I think what nearshoring does, it plays to each country's, or it needs to play to each country's strengths. So, for example, where we see in the case of the UK that there's certainly a value in nearshoring is in the services area. I mean, they're very big in obviously the banking services, in transferring technology when it comes to construction, when it comes to training. There's areas where there's significant expertise. And what I see in the case of Canada, obviously Canada has been a large investor in Mexico, particularly, for example, in the mining sector. I certainly do believe that there could be a lot of collaboration between Mexico and Canada for the mining, and particularly for the mining in the areas that are relevant for the Plan Sonora and this electromobility initiative that I think is a vertical integration of the minerals to the actual batteries or vehicles that are going to be manufactured in Mexico. And I think there's, in that particular space, there's still a lot to be done between the understanding of Mexico and Canada. And as I cited in my presentation, I think our history with having these lawful migration programs and the transfer of technology and training people under the auspices of these exchange programs between the countries could certainly serve as leverage in order to take this experience into other sectors.
Thanks very much, Luis. Gerardo.
Yes, Mark, thank you. To complement Luis Ricardo's comments, from the data from 2006, we received from Canada $670 million. So 2006, $670 million. Last year, we received from Canada $3.2 billion in investment. So that's 5 times in this, let's say, 15, 18 years. So yes, we've seen the increase in foreign direct investment from Canada and Mexico. Unfortunately, I don't have the data from Canada, but I will look into that. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Gerardo. I know that everybody's got a very busy schedules at all times, so we've now used our time. I'll have to hold up on some of the other questions. There was just one comment congratulating the Consulate of Canada and the Canadian Chamber in Monterrey for doing lots of excellent work on facilitating and encouraging the Canada-Mexico relationship, and so I would echo that. But I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We think there's a lot of opportunity here. Nearshoring's opened up new vistas. Clearly, if anybody has further questions, you want to follow up on anything, you want to pursue anything, have questions or advice, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Luis or any of us. Really, we're easy to find, thanks to the internet. And so thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to my colleagues for participating in the webinar. And I wish you all a very fine and productive day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.